One. Welcome to episode 7 of Four Questions With. Today I'm joined by Andrew Meredith, the editor of Farmers Weekly. So, Andrew, my first question for you is how did you get involved in the agricultural sector?
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I was born and brought up in farming. I was raised in mid Wales on the English-Welsh border on a beef and sheep farm by my mum and dad. And then I studied agriculture at Aberystwyth University. And then I worked at home in the family business for another 5 years after that before joining Farmers Weekly in 2016 in my first job then, which was arable reporter.
That was definitely a interesting way to get into the sector, both from joining the family business and then joining one of the leading publications in the sector to then now becoming editor.
Yeah, so I became editor 5 years ago, beginning of 2021, um, having done another job within the business along the way. Um, we about half of our journalists probably are of farming, and then the other half come from other careers. And we sort of say within the business, we either take someone who knows about farming and teaches them how to write, or we take someone who has normally journalistic ability but doesn't know much about the business of farming. So, like with a lot of jobs, it's a continuous learning process. I'm still learning from my brilliant colleagues. I'm still learning more about the business of publishing and journalism now. And I'm also still learning, obviously, as we all are, plenty more about farming every week too.
No, 100%. It is definitely a learning experience working in the agricultural sector because no day is the same.
Exactly. It's important to, the farmers I enjoy meeting the most are those ones who are always trying to learn from their mistakes and are willing to share them. That makes great stories. But the ones who have that open mind, are interested in innovation, I think they're typically the better farmers, but they're also some of our best subscribers and audience members too, because the product that we're serving readers, a lot of those technical articles obviously are about tweaks and changes they can make to their own businesses, inspiration that we're giving them, and hopefully then those thoughts and learnings from other farmers are landing on fertile ground, and hopefully then, as a product, people are seeing the return on investment in a subscription. They're seeing help for them to run their own business as well as being kept up to date with everything that's going on in the wider world.
No, I couldn't agree more. So, leading on from that, my next question is, where do you see the agricultural sector heading in the future?
I, there's so many ways you could answer that question, isn't there? But the one I've picked is just something I've been thinking a lot about lately. I think it's nearly inevitable that consolidation of farm businesses will continue. You can go and look up DEFRA statistics in many different ways about how farm sizes are growing, how the average acreage or the number of animals kept per farming business is increasing. But a statistic I saw recently from Oxbury Bank in an interview with the Times, they said that uh, there's 16,700 larger farms as they classify it. That represents 18% of all farms, and they are producing 80%, 80% of Britain's farming output now. So there's enormous amount of consolidation already happening. Less than a fifth of our farmers are producing four-fifths of our food already. And so to come right back to your question, where do I think that, what indication does that mean then for what people entering the industry should take from that now? It's that, whether we like it or not, this is going to continue. That makes it harder and harder for you to set up your own business. But there's going to be plenty of opportunities in the future, I think, to have fulfilling and rewarding careers in agriculture, even if you end up as an employee or a partner in a large business rather than paddling your own canoe as you perhaps would have historically.
No, I agree with that. And also, you said about being an employee of the business, it will bring new entrants into the sector because you might get someone from a tech background who aids with development of technology on the farm to help them become more efficient, and that's especially relevant on big farms because it's all about yield and output and the bottom line.
Yeah. And it's a problem too when you talk to the ancillary industries that surround farming. You know, I remember vividly speaking last year to um, a dairy robot, milking robot manufacturer, and they said that, you know, typically, historically, you know, the a lot of the employees that were out on farm installing and servicing these were also drawn from farming, you know, farmers' sons and daughters. And he said, you know, that pipeline, as there's fewer farming families, is not enough anymore, and they're in a growing business too. And so he said that's a challenge because, you know, farmers like meeting and working with other farmers, but it is, as you say, that opportunity then as well to bring in new skills, new perspectives, and it really creates I think people with different ambitions too. You know, people are willing to come into the sector with an ambition to rise through the ranks in a large farming business, whereas historically that aspiration was typically about climbing the farming ladder, running your own business, and that selects and creates. You know, for different types of individuals who want to pursue those careers for better and worse, I suppose.
No, that's definitely true. And I think having a different perspective on the industry is a good is good because I'm born and raised in the city. I work on the PR side when it comes to agriculture, and it allows me to ask what I seem as like questions that may not be sort of the typical ones that the farmers get.
Yeah, that was something that I found early in my career, and it's something I tell other journalists too. You know, don't be afraid to ask those questions. It's better to ask what you think is an obvious question and let that person be the expert than make a mistake and let them have to discipline you on it instead, or make you look like a fool in some way. So we're there's no such thing as a stupid question in my book, anyway.
No, I agree. I agree. An example of that for me is I was out on a photo shoot and I saw some baling being done, and it was they were making haylage, and I was just asking the farmer who we were with, like, what's the difference? Why is that being baled and some you see being, picked up and then dumped in the silage clamp? And it was that mix of like it depends on how the farmer uses the silage or haylage, but also it's the space on the farm as well, because some might not have big enough clamps and it's more efficient for them to have bales.
And I think that's why some people are often so frustrated with how a farming change takes so long as they perceive it you know, if you're trying to influence a farmer to change their decision, whether it's because you're working farm policy or you work in sales, whatever that reason is, the the decisions that farmers do and don't make are the culmination of so many different data points and farming culture and insights, aren't they? That how a farm operates is, you know, there's a web of decisions under every action, isn't there, that can make understanding the industry as a whole, or even understanding that one business, actually really, really complicated.
Yeah, because it's that idea of one farm does a certain job one way, and then a farm 3 miles away does it completely different, and that could be down to the soil on the farm, what yields they're getting, and also the topography of the land as well.
Absolutely. And just um, peer pressure and farming culture is another massive driver behind how farmers operate. And so the willingness or not to change or experiment is driven by whether they feel those decisions are going to see them endorsed or mocked. You know, and I think that's definitely a factor in some circumstances, as it is in an awful lot of walks of life. You know, how we think we are going to be perceived if we change is a massive driver of the behaviors that we exhibit in business as well as in life.
No, that's definitely true. So my third question for you is, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think I think when I'm in my late 30s now, and when I look back at my 20s, one thing I didn't appreciate at the time was the ability you have then, as in my case, a recent graduate with not that many responsibilities, you have the opportunity to work hard and immerse yourself in your career if you want to. I didn't start a family until I was well into my 30s, with my wife, who I met after I moved to London. And the responsibilities, when you're older, if you go down that route of having kids and having, maybe parents in some circumstances that need caring for as you get to later in life, or all sorts of other things creep in. So if career progress is important to you, then your 20s are where you have the ability to lay those foundations before the rest of life sort of demands more of your time. And it's a nuanced encouragement I would say to make to other people, because obviously I don't want, none of us want to encourage people to burn out. None of us want to encourage people to only devote themselves to work and be, you know, really boring and miss out on all the other opportunities that life offers. But I would say that's definitely something that I've reflected on. I'm glad of the progress I was able to make uh, prior to having a family in particular, because now I feel like the hours in the day are just fewer. So for me now, I'm thinking about how, more about how to be efficient, because there are fewer, you can't spend as long on things as you were previously able.
No, I think that's definitely a good piece of advice. So now we come to the final question, which is the one that gets the most interesting answers and sometimes a bit left field. If you were head of DEFRA, what would be your first order of business?
Again, as we touched on in other questions, there are so many ways to answer this. But for me, the thing that frustrates me most about watching politicians operate, as we do a lot of here at Farmers Weekly, is their seeming inability to acknowledge the trade-offs they make in their decisions. So when they have an announcement, they want to paint something as totally positive and not really allude to the negatives. And as we all know, there's so much grey area in life, isn't there? And everything they choose to do is, with a finite pot of money and a shrinking pot of money, once you take inflation into account, their ability to buy change from the farming industry is becoming less and less. And so there's fewer and fewer things they can do and more things they can't do to the same level. So I would like to see more honesty from our political leaders, including at DEFRA, when they come out and make an announcement or they're defending a policy and say, for example, with SFI, look, we're trying to make this more equitable, for example, as we're seeing at the moment, by encouraging more small businesses into it. But we acknowledge that we can't provide the same level of funding to everybody in England. We can't provide even any funding, probably, to some farmers, given the size of the pot. We've made a targeted set of choices here, and we think it's going to benefit these sectors the most. But be honest and say the ones for whom it's not going to be that beneficial, and show your working out, demonstrate why you felt like you had to choose option A over option B. I think farmers would respect an unvarnished and honest assessment of the power that they do and don't have, rather than trying to be overly upbeat and then also defensive sometimes when they're challenged on why they haven't done certain things. So I suppose you could boil all of that right down in as just to be more honest.
No, I totally agree. And I think going back to what you're saying about the SFI, it is such a finite pot of money and it makes farmers have to make decisions. Because I know I've heard from various people that from time to time, if they do an SFI grant in the past, they've made more money from not farming that field through the grant than if they would farming it and putting produce on the table. So it's got to make sense, and I do agree with you. They have to be honest with the farming community because the farming community are on the ground, on day-to-day viewing of what's going on. And if they know, as you said, option this is why we've gone with option A, this is why currently we are circled off and can't get anything, I think they'll get, as you say, more respect.
Yeah. And I would stress, this isn't a problem that's unique to the politicians that lead DEFRA. It seems like it's a malaise that's spread across government. They're once they take office, once they're a member of the cabinet in particular, it feels like they have an inability to speak like humans anymore. They get trapped by that political language, and that is one of the reasons why people get very frustrated with um, the quality and level of political discourse and the inability for them to seemingly often give a straight answer to a straight question.
No, I think it's all the advice they get from the various advisors they have at their disposal. It becomes a deluge, and it sort of gets regurgitated verbatim, like it's just coming out of a teleprompter.
Yeah, yeah. I have a lot of sympathy for politicians too. They've been asked to do a hard job, and often, if you look at the incumbent at DEFRA, for example, at the moment, Emma Reynolds, clearly not come from within our industry, and that's fine. We don't always have to be led by a farmer, but that's the learning curve that she will have had to go through before she feels confident to make any sort of speech in front of a room full of experts. Can you imagine? I would hate to have to go and give a speech to a room full of head teachers, for example, knowing nothing about education apart from my own schooling, and come across competent and well versed. So the challenge for them is immense, and of course they are supported well by their big departments, but they are asked to do a hard job. But I don't think um, any of them lack the ability, if they wanted to be more honest. That's something that we all have the ability to do, isn't it, if we choose it?
Yeah, and I think it's also they need to reach out to the stakeholder organizations and the people within there. They need to do that more to get more input as well, because sometimes I feel with DEFRA it isn't always filled with people from a farming background, so the understanding might get lost. But if you're reaching out to the likes of NFU, CLA, and those types of organizations, you have the expertise to hand. And it's get yourself to shows like Lammer, Royal Welsh, Royal Highland, shows like that to see what's going on in the ground, hear what people actually think rather than hearing things second, third, fourth, fifth hand or through opinion polls.
Yeah, and to their credit, my understanding is the ministerial team will be pretty visible this summer at various events, and obviously they do take a lot of meetings with those lobbying organisations that you mentioned. And the challenge sometimes is, even if you take those meetings, often they're hearing one thing from one organisation and a competing thing from another. The NFU want one thing, and maybe the nature friendly farmers want another. The CLA and the Tenant Farmers Association, they agree on some things, but certainly not all of them, right? So having to pass that information and then actually deliver a policy with only those finite resources that we discussed earlier. These are very difficult jobs, but they could still do more to explain themselves better, I feel.
Nope. And I think what you want to do as your first order of business could be a good start, and fingers crossed it might happen in the near future. So thank you all for joining us, and we will see you all on the next episode.